Just on 1 year ago, I'd set out on my first ever long bike tour, a ride of over 4,000 kilometres from Finland to Portugal. And here I now found myself, ready to start the next chapter of this life on the ride journey of self-discovery.
Alright, well here I am at the municipal square in Caldas da Rainha. I'm just about to head out. Sunrise is in about 20 or so minutes I guess. And it's a cool morning, but it's going to get up to about 25 degrees, so I'm just looking forward to getting rolling. There's my Matilda, she's all packed up, got my safety vest on, going to put the lights on, and it's time to head out on leg one of the Tour de Portugal.
I think, as a consequence of the experiences from that first tour, I was now happy with where my life was at generally. So, before I'd barely started this new chapter, I'd finally internalised the true value of undertaking any journey, which is not about how fast it is done, but how well. Heading southwards, we rolled through the nearby medieval town of Óbidos, one of the most picturesque and well preserved in Portugal. I'd actually lived there for 4 months back in 2015, while spending time at the local co-work space, Espaço O, while writing my book Life on the Run, which was very fitting as the surrounding landscapes were ideal for engaging in my passion of trail running. The Óbidos aqueduct seemed to be pointing the way for us to go, a climb up to Uceira, which would take us to the edge of the Shire, where we'd have to leave the familiar behind. At that point, we would be stepping, or in this case rolling, into the unknown once again.
About an hour into my ride, I did my first reasonable climb of the day up to the top of Uceira. I'm on my way to Serra de Montejunto. I'm just about to start my descent into, I think it's Carvalhal, and I'm going to have a coffee break there. Actually, if you look in that direction there, that's actually where the mountain is, but of course you can't see it because we're right in the middle of a mist. But it's absolutely a gorgeous morning, really sunny. Warm, and it's just a joy to be in this mist and get rolling. So now time for a bit of downhill and coffee break.
The first major location of interest to visit was Serra de Montejunto, a limestone mountain ridge rising 666 metres above sea level. It's covered with naturally adapted vegetation, with the home and Kermes oaks dominating. Humans already settled on the mountain in the Neolithic period, with the remnants of necropolis caves and castles to be found. The top of the mountain was even chosen, in the 12th century, as the location for Portugal's first Dominican convent. The ride up ended up being easier than I'd expected, despite not having been in the saddle for 10 months. However, I did occasionally have to get off and push. The grade was just simply beyond my capacity to spin with enough power to move both myself and a fully laden Matilda up to the summit. However, since I'd left my ego back at the base of the mountain, I, at least, was in no rush, though I can't speak for my trusted two-wheel travel companion. In the end, the slow climb was more than worth the struggle as Portugal opened up in all directions, including over the route that we'd covered that morning, as well as in the direction that we were heading in the afternoon towards the Tagus River. The descent was, not surprisingly, fast and exhilarating, and thankfully, the afternoon's ride was over mostly flat and mildly undulating terrain. We passed through the small towns of Alcocentre and Cartacho as we worked our way towards our first crossing of the Tagus River at Morgado by the famous Ponte Rainha Dona Amélia. This old railway bridge, which is constructed from 14 spans for a total length of 840 metres, was converted to also take road traffic in 2001. Crossing the Tagus, the same river that flows into Lisbon, was a significant moment as Matilda and I were now definitely entering into new and unknown territory. We'd be meeting her again in 5 days' time on our way back towards the Atlantic coast, but for now we still had some 12 kilometres to go to get to our first evening's rest stop, the Parque de Campismo Escaroupim. I spent the evening on my own in silence while enjoying a few sagres and abatanados at the campsite cafe. When finally back in my tent, and as I waited for my eyes to close, I remember feeling a deep sense of contentment. I don't think that there was any other specific reason for it, except maybe the realization about just how wonderful it felt to be back on the road again. As I got going on day 2, I was having trouble accepting the fact that it had been 10 months since the end of my previous tour, a trans-European ride from Finland to Portugal. It was like I'd never been off the bike at all. It just felt like I'd taken a few days or maybe a week off and it was time to again roll onwards. Time truly is a relative concept. At the very few times that I became aware of my thoughts, I imagined what the next part of my Japanese tattoo would look like and whether I'd taken up Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for the right reasons. I also had random thoughts about what the next 20 years of my life might include, but not in a negative sense. For the first time in a long while, I experienced a youthful sense of wonder and optimism at what might be possible to see and do. It almost felt like my mind had essentially reset itself after the major life challenges of the past few years. It felt like the road ahead was once again clear. Before I knew it, the day's ride was nearly over as I came upon the Barragem de Montargil, and although I'd not consciously registered it earlier, the sky had cleared at some point and I was now being bathed by a warm afternoon sun as I enjoyed the views over the water from the dam wall. While slowly sipping away a few sagres, I slowly set up for the night at the nearby camping ground. I recall smiling as if totally stoned off my nut. Despite it being possibly the cheesiest thing ever to say, I really did feel high on life in that moment as day 2 drew to a close. The sunrise over the Albufeira as I started my roll on day 3 was nothing short of blindingly beautiful. The sun's rays glistened intensely over the water to the sounds of sheep as they were being shepherded along the shoreline, just down the ridge from the road. The ride to Ponta de Sor was so relaxed and enjoyable as the morning heated up that I made a point of consciously scanning the amazing landscape as opposed to retiring within as I'd done on the previous day. When nature puts on a show such as this, you have no choice but to give it your full attention. My afternoon self was not as energy infused as in the morning, in fact quite the opposite. Despite the fantastic weather conditions, I felt my batteries dropping to empty at an unexpectedly rapid rate. Fortunately, the mill break in Alta de Chão, where I enjoyed possibly the best ever tosta mista of my life, a triple-decker serving of utter goodness, allowed me to recharge sufficiently to at least make the last third of the day's ride tolerable. My spirits were also later uplifted when I unexpectedly linked up with a section of the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage route, which brought back fond memories of my own inaugural Camino some 1.5 years earlier.
Look, cows!
Passing a herd of cows along the way also gave me an additional injection of joy. I don't know why, but even the sight of these creatures simply makes me feel happy. On approach to Portalegre, a hilltop town at the foothills of Serra de São Mamede, and our destination for the day, only my pilot light was now on. I actually had to push Matilda the last kilometre or so up the steep slope to our hostel for the night. Fortunately, without the need to set up camp, I was quickly able to get settled and insert a solid meal and a few beers into my belly. It didn't take too long to start feeling pretty good again, and that gave me the energy to go and explore the old town a bit. However, it was soon time to go for early Betty Bobos, as tomorrow would be a rather challenging day with some fairly decent climbing in the mountains. On this bright sunny morning, Matilda and I lazily made our way out of Portalegre. The leisurely pace gave me the opportunity to calmly gaze back towards the westward plains over which we'd ridden the previous day. As we were now heading into the mountains, it felt like some kind of threshold had been crossed, and that a new phase was about to begin, not only on this particular ride, but in my life in general. I remember feeling a deep sense of calm satisfaction and joy as we began our gradual roll uphill towards the sky. Upon reaching the summit, and with the medieval town of Marvão coming into view on the horizon, I could feel the heavy load on my legs and heart easing off as the road flattened out. In that moment, I sensed that I was also dropping a heavy load from my shoulders. I think I'd now come to terms with the psychological and emotional pressures which I'd unconsciously allowed to weigh me down and largely control the direction of my life over the previous 20 years. It was finally time to let it all go and to begin writing a new history. The sheer thrill and exhilaration of accelerating down the other side of the mountain, with the wind washing powerfully over my face, began to fill my heart and mind with the fuel of optimism. I was now ready and willing to descend with speed, to voluntarily dive deep into the unknown in search of the pearls of wisdom and love. Life unfolds in a chain of instantaneous experiences. As time passes, those bites of momentary awareness become more and more distant memories. Both the simplest and greatest joy in life comes from an awareness and acceptance of our present existence. On this day, I was determined to just enjoy the views while rolling along the road less travelled. Day 5 marked the midpoint of this current trip as I shifted course back towards the Atlantic coast. Emotionally, it was also a kind of transitional day. With the ride itself being a relatively short one, I was granted a respite from the physical demands of having to propel myself forwards to and often beyond the point of exhaustion. My mind was free to enjoy the day as it unfolded, to speed along the backcountry roads, to soar over the fields, and to bathe in the warmth of the sun. I received the grace of truly knowing what it means to live in the now. As Matilda and I approached the Tagus for a second time on this trip, the mood was quite different than during our first encounter. Physically and mentally, this was to be a very heavy day. The entire morning was spent pretty much head down and bum up as we navigated through incessant bouts of heavy rain, which had us both soaked through to the core. However, the inclement weather did ease off for a few hours during the afternoon. This gave us the welcome opportunity to fully appreciate a beautiful sequence of climbs and descents through a fairly rugged and remote backcountry area. Approach to Vila de Rei, the rain had already returned, but this time it was somehow softer, almost embracingly so.
G'day. Day 6 afternoon, and I've made it to the geodesic centre of Portugal, which is just nearby Vila de Rei, which I'll be staying for the night. It's been a decent day of climbing from Alagoa, where I was staying last night. But anyway, I've made it. It's been a drizzly, rainy day all day, but there's been a bit of sun out, so definitely worth it, and it's been warm, so nothing too much to worry about. Anyway, here we are at the heart of Portugal. Journey continues.
Matilda and I had arrived at the geodesic centre of Portugal. At the same time, I felt like I'd also arrived at my own personal centre, at the core understanding that everything was going to be okay, no matter what. Having reached the heart of Portugal the day before, the rollout of Vila de Rei this morning was a fast one. Matilda and I enjoyed a long downhill at speed, like oxygen-enriched arterial blood shooting out into the aorta under pressure, eager to nourish the body's hungry muscles. Westwards down into the gorge we accelerated in silence. After having negotiated the series of climbs out of Miradouro Penedo Forado, we hit a deliciously flat patch of asphalt, which allowed me to open up Matilda's engines for an exhilarating half-hour time trial of fast rolling. Even though still carrying a fair bit of weight, my baby had no problems in hurtling us towards our day's destination, the world-famous pilgrimage town of Tomar. Despite making great time, we weren't in a rush to end our day's roll. So, when we came upon another major landmark on this leg of the journey, the Barragem de Castelo de Bode, it was a fitting place to take a relaxing lunch break and soak in the stunning views of the dam. With our unexpectedly early arrival in Tamar, I had plenty of time to go and explore the breathtakingly beautiful Castelo dos Templarios and Convento de Cristo, perched high up on the hill overlooking the town. I still can't manage to wrap my head around how these utterly magnificent works of architecture were built back in the 12th century. Matilda and I were now on the penultimate day of this first leg of our tour to Portugal, and how fitting it was to have the opportunity to undertake our own mini Camino along the old pilgrimage route from Tamar to Fatima. Fatima had become famous for the appearances of the apparition of the Virgin Mary to 3 young shepherds over a period of 6 months in 1917. Well, at least that's how the story goes. Who knows what really happened some 100 years ago? Regardless, it was nice to entertain the imagination as we navigated our way along the peaceful, though at times rather rough, roads leading to the Santuario de Fatima, where we would arrive at exactly high noon.
Olá! Bom dia! Bom dia! Day 8, it's exactly on lunchtime. I've just arrived in Fatima, and this precinct here is absolutely amazing, the Basilica. I think they're just starting a midday service over there as well. You can hear that in the background. It's been a really good ride this morning, and it's just a fantastic place to visit here. It's just absolutely huge. I can only imagine what this is like, you know, when the Pope's been visiting and you've got just this whole area here just full of people. But anyway, so I've still got to ride down to Alcobaça via Porta de Mos this afternoon. And that's it. Yep, a bit of rain expected later on today, but I should keep dry for the afternoon. All right, see you later.
The afternoon's ride would take us over the last major mountain pass of this leg, one which would reward us with a very fast descent into Porto de Mos. Having heard from two Polish bike tourists who we'd run into in Fatima that there was some decent rain on the way, we were going to be cutting it close to making it to our final stop in Alcobaça without getting soaked. So we kept pushing on, though still briefly stopping for a snack break at the base of the town's green-roofed castle built in a Romanesque style. We'd arrived in Alcobaça just as the rain had started, first as a light drizzle, but which then gradually set in over the next hour or so. However, worrying about the rain was the last thing on my mind as I set off to explore the stunning monastery, the final resting place of King Pedro and Inês de Castro, Portugal's own Romeo and Juliet. Now that's a real tale of deep love and tragic loss. Fortunately, Matilda and I are unlikely to ever suffer the same fate. The final day had arrived. The sun was gently warming up the morning as we meandered through the small towns on the short roll back to our starting point in Caldas da Rainha. What a pleasure it was to finally get to explore the territory and landscapes to be found at the edges of my home shire. I've always found it incredibly nostalgic to revisit places I'd not seen in years, such as when I visited the neighbourhoods of my childhood in Sydney, Mount Isa and Brisbane, Australia. Even though it had only been 9 days since we departed Caldas, maybe the journey had in some way accelerated my thoughts beyond the regular reaches of time. I was experiencing that same feeling of nostalgia as if I'd been away for years. I was seeing my home away from home with new eyes, and I guess also a new heart. The effect of travel and exploration, and the reasons why I do it, are reflected perfectly in the following quote by T.S. Eliot. "We shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time."